Bessie Moore was born Annie Stone in 1854 in Syracuse, New York, to a shoe dealer. At the age of 15, she left home and became involved with a man named Moore. She was known for her extraordinary beauty, with black hair and brilliant gray eyes. After her affair with Moore ended, Bessie entered into prostitution, though she retained Moore's name. She quickly adapted to this lifestyle, and her many male admirers showered her with diamond jewelry. Bessie worked in several brothels, starting with the Mansion of Joy in Cincinnati, Ohio, then moving to the brothels of New Orleans in Louisiana, and finally Hot Springs, Arkansas. Abraham Rothschild, born in 1853 in Cincinnati, Ohio, was the son of Meyer Rothschild, a Cincinnati jeweler. Despite sharing a surname, he was not related to the prominent European Rothschild banking family. Handsome and a capable businessman, Abe worked as a traveling salesman for his father's prosperous jewelry business. However, his penchant for fast living and women led to alcoholism, making him an embarrassment to his family, as he frequented saloons and brothels. In 1876, Abe met Bessie Moore in a Hot Springs brothel. From then until her death, they remained together. Moore pressured Rothschild to marry her, and various accounts suggested she may have claimed to be pregnant. An autopsy later revealed she was not, and threatened to expose the scandalous claim to his father. Their relationship was tumultuous, marred by alcoholism and physical abuse. Rothschild allegedly forced Moore into prostitution multiple times during their travels. In January of 1877, while traveling from Chicago to Texas, the couple stopped in Danville, Illinois, and married at the Etna Hotel. A reporter from the Danville News interviewed them and published an article on January 11, 1877. On January 17, 1877, the couple registered as husband and wife at the Capitol Hotel in Marshall, Texas, about 18 miles south of Jefferson. After 2 days, they traveled to Jefferson by train. At the time, Jefferson was one of the largest and busiest river ports west of the Mississippi River. The exact nature of Rothschild's business in Jefferson is unclear, as is when his plan to murder Moore may have been devised. The couple registered at the Brooks Hotel in Jefferson as A. Monroe and wife. Their fine clothes and Moore's diamonds made an immediate impression on the townsfolk. Rothschild first addressed his wife as Bessie during this trip, leading the locals to nickname her Diamond Bessie. On the morning of January 21st, Rothschild bought a picnic lunch from Henrique's restaurant. The couple then crossed the bridge at Cypress Bayou, walking away from town along the Marshall Road. The last person to see them together was Frank Malloy, who noticed them in the restaurant before 11 a.m. and took special note of Moore's massive diamond rings. About 3 hours later, Rothschild was seen crossing the bridge back into Jefferson alone. When questioned about his wife's whereabouts at the Brooks house, Rothschild claimed that she had stayed across the bayou to visit friends. The following morning, he took breakfast alone at the hotel, where he was seen wearing Moore's rings. On the morning of Tuesday, January 23rd, he boarded a train to Cincinnati with his and Moore's luggage. Bessie Moore's body was discovered in the woods along the Marshall Road on the afternoon of February 5th by Sarah King, an African-American woman collecting firewood. She had been shot in the head. The remnants of a picnic lunch were still scattered about. Her body was fully clothed and had no jewelry. The townsfolk held a collection and raised $150 to pay for Moore's burial. In Cincinnati, Rothschild began drinking more heavily and became increasingly paranoid, believing he was being followed. In late February, he attempted to shoot himself outside a saloon, but only succeeded in putting out his right eye. After a few days in the hospital, he was arrested and jailed, awaiting extradition to Texas for the murder of Diamond Bessie Moore. With Rothschild's true identity revealed, the case quickly became famous. Though Rothschild was the black sheep of his family, their fear of a devastating scandal prompted them to rally to his side and hire a formidable defense team. Rothschild had no fewer than 10 high-priced attorneys who secured a change of venue due to the hostile feelings towards him in Jefferson, where any possible jury pool was tainted. The townspeople had contributed money to reimburse Sheriff John Vines for his trip to Cincinnati to arrest Rothschild. The case finally went to trial in December of 1878 in Marshall. While in jail there, Rothschild's cellmate, Jim Curry, a railroad employee who had shot 2 actors, killing one, The survivor was actor Maurice Barrymore, the great-great-grandfather of Drew Barrymore. After a 3-week trial, Rothschild was convicted, with the jury foreman reportedly drawing a noose on the wall during deliberations and writing, "That's my verdict." However, the conviction was overturned on appeal. There was widespread opinion that Rothschild's wealth and Moore being a prostitute influenced the appellate court. After much legal wrangling, Rothschild went to trial again on December 22, 1880, this time in Jefferson. Rothschild did not testify in his own defense, and his lawyers managed to plant doubts in the jury members' minds. To the dismay of many, Rothschild was acquitted and rejoined his family in Cincinnati. After the acquittal, Rothschild continued a life of crime. His later exploits included posing as a wealthy businessman in several southern towns to acquire large quantities of jewelry on credit, then quickly leaving town before being discovered. He died July 20th, 1923, at the age of 68. Anthony Blair lived with his stepdaughter, Maggie, in Washington County near Jonesboro. In May of 1879, Maggie moved out of Blair's house and started living and working for William Donaldson in Hamblin County. She was known for being very smart and industrious. Upon discovering her whereabouts, Blair traveled to Russellville, Tennessee, on July 29th and went straight to the Donaldson residence. He entered the kitchen, where Maggie and Mrs. Donaldson were preparing dinner. Blair asked Maggie to come outside because he had something to say to her, but she refused and insisted he could speak in front of Mrs. Donaldson. Shortly afterward, William Donaldson arrived, and Blair promptly left the house. The next night, on Wednesday, Maggie went with others to a prayer meeting at the Black Church near Russellville. As they were returning, Blair encountered some of the people who had attended the service. After a brief conversation, he continued toward Russellville, but soon changed direction, taking a different road that the young people, including Maggie, had taken. He caught up with the group and approached his stepdaughter, who was walking at the back with a boy named Taylor. Pushing Taylor aside, Blair grabbed Maggie's hand and said, "You must go home with me on the train tonight to your grandpa," and began dragging her along the road for 150 to 200 yards, insisting she come with him. Maggie struggled to free herself, declaring that she would rather die than go with him. At that point, Blair drew a pistol and shot her twice. She died the following Saturday at the age of 16. After being convicted at trial, Blair's execution was scheduled for September 26th. A crowd estimated at 8,000 to 10,000 gathered to witness the event. A reporter described the day's proceedings. Blair, who was around 30 years old, appeared to have a harsh and sensuous look, with a demeanor suggesting he was capable of any crime. At noon, Sheriff Loop and 28 guards went to the jail, where a reporter also accompanied them into Blair's cell. Blair seemed indifferent and emotionless. He quietly accepted the manacles and walked steadily to the wagon that transported him to the gallows. Following a religious service led by Reverend George Blainer, an African-American minister, the prisoner was allowed to speak. Blair's speech was as disturbing as one might expect. He admitted his guilt, but revealed details leading up to the crime that were deemed unfit for publication. At 1:30 p.m., the rope was secured and a black cap placed over his head. At 1:35 p.m., the wagon was pulled away. Within 9 minutes, there was no detectable pulse. By 10 minutes, his heart had stopped. 15 minutes after being hanged, he was pronounced dead, and 22 minutes later, his body was placed in a coffin. Wallace Wilkerson was born in Quincy, Illinois, into a Mormon family. When he was 8, he moved with his parents to the Utah Territory. By the age of 17, he was working as a stockman and horsebreaker. He enlisted in the military several times and once served as a drummer in San Francisco, California. In 1877, Wilkerson lived in Payson, Utah Territory, and worked with his brothers in Homansville. He often visited a saloon in nearby Eureka, where the bartender, William Baxter, once called him a California Mormon, a derogatory term. Baxter also used a 6-shooter to intervene in a dispute between Wilkerson and another patron at the saloon. On June 11, 1877, William Baxter stopped at a saloon owned by James Hightower in the Tintic Mining District while en route to Homansville. There, he encountered Wallace Wilkerson, and the two began a card game of cribbage for money. An argument ensued over allegations of cheating. Baxter tried to withdraw from the conflict, but was shot fatally in the forehead and temple by Wilkerson, who then fled the scene. The following morning, the coroner confirmed that Baxter was unarmed at the time of the shooting. Authorities swiftly captured Wilkerson and held him under guard in Goshen to prevent a lynching. Wilkerson was indicted for premeditated murder by a grand jury. On September 29, 1877, he pled not guilty and was incarcerated in the Utah County Jail. His trial began at the 1st District Court of Utah Territory on November 22nd, and he was convicted by the jury 2 days later. On November 28th, State District Judge P.H. Emerson sentenced Wilkerson to death, with the execution scheduled for December 14, 1877. Wilkerson opted to be executed by firing squad, choosing this method over hanging or decapitation, which were also legal in the territory at the time. After Wilkerson's attorney filed an appeal, a stay of execution was granted. The Supreme Court of Utah Territory rejected the appeal in January of 1878. On January 8, 1879, attorneys E.D. Hodge and P.L. Williams presented a writ of error to the U.S. Supreme Court during its October 1878 term, arguing that Wilkerson's execution would constitute cruel and unusual punishment. On March 17, 1879, Justice Nathan Clifford issued the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling, which upheld the original verdict. The court concluded that while the Constitution forbids cruel and unusual punishment, the use of a firing squad for executing a death sentence for first-degree murder did not fall under the prohibition according to the Eighth Amendment. On May 15, 1879, Wilkerson was transferred from Salt Lake City to a jail in Provo. He spent his final day with his wife until just half an hour before the execution, and he declined visits from clergy. On the day of his execution, Sheriff John Turner, a deputy, and U.S. Marshal Shaughnessy escorted him out of his cell. Dressed in black with a white felt hat and holding a cigar, which he kept throughout the execution, Wilkerson gave a farewell speech thanking the law enforcement officers and shook hands with some of the 25 people present in the jail yard. Approximately 200 spectators gathered outside. Wilkerson expressed no resentment, except towards a witness he accused of perjury during his trial. Some observers noted that he seemed intoxicated. Wilkerson was seated in a chair about 30 feet from the firing squad and refused to be blindfolded. He insisted that no restraints were needed, stating, "I give you my word, I intend to die like a man," looking my executioners right in the eye. A 3-inch white paper target was pinned on his chest over his heart. Before the execution began, Wilkerson called out, "Aim for my heart, Marshal." At approximately noon on May 16, 1879, the Marshal signaled the shooters concealed in a shed. As the count ended, Wilkerson stiffened in the chair, causing the target to shift. The bullets missed his heart. One shattered his arm, while the others hit his torso. He jumped from the chair, shouting, oh my God, they've missed." 4 doctors rushed to his side as he struggled and gasped on the ground. Officials briefly considered a second volley, but he was pronounced dead 27 minutes later, having bled to death.